Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to create this watercolour Japanese inspired landscape. If you enjoy this tutorial, make sure to like and subscribe for nature art content, and make sure to let me know in the comments what you liked about this video. And I'm going to show you guys exactly how to paint this alongside me. To begin with, for this painting I created a really dark brown, mixing brown and a little bit of blue to make it as cold and dark as possible. Using a little bit of this same colour, I created two different shades of grey, adding white to each one. One of them I added a lot more to create more of a light grey, and then the other one slightly less, so it was on the darker side. I then went in with the light grey to paint the left hand side of the building. This is the building on the left as well, as we don't want to go into the middle just yet, as we're strategically painting to allow some drying time for each element, and you'll see that come into fruition later on. I also painted a little triangular section on the top of this building, and in this I added a tiny little drop of blue as well, so you've got more of that colder colour and element to it. There's quite a lot of blue that's reflected within this painting, so to be able to have that added into the building is going to really tie everything together later on, especially with the mountain, as that's got a lot of blue in there also. Then I went in with that dark brown on the right hand side of the building, more towards the bottom, and I did it in this order. It seems a little bit random at this stage, but you don't want all these different sections touching, as if they do they're all going to merge together, which is really not what you want for a building, as the lines are usually very clean cut. So to allow this drying time and with this separation, it is going to help make life a little bit easier for painting this section. And then once we've got this in, I went in with that darker grey and mapped in the right hand side of the roof, so you can see the separation and where everything curves without actually having to add in a harsh line to do so. It's just naturally there now, and it ties together really well and makes everything look far more natural. Also going in with the dark brown, you can map in the little bars over the windows. Just these small details are going to help add that extra element to the painting, which in my opinion is really important. You want them little details to make this special and unique and really bring the painting to life. So at this stage it is mainly about getting in all the right colours and shades as opposed to all the detail. Yes, you can add in a few of them small lines, but the main focus is getting in all that colour, and then we can paint over it later on and add in more detail to each separate building. To finish the building that I'm currently painting, I went in on the left hand side of the bottom of the building, added that dark brown again, but this time I added more water and less paint, so it was slightly lighter than that right hand side. Again, just to show the way the light is travelling, it's typically lighter on the left hand side for this particular painting, so it's just subtle ways that we can make sure we've got that in there. Once you've got as much down as you can for the first building without anything overlapping, I then recommend moving onto the right hand side, as again you don't want to paint that middle building just yet, as it will merge into the left building. So keeping the separation there is really still very crucial at this stage. And there's a little bit more to map around for this right hand side, so there's a lot more going over the top of it, which you'll see later as we paint this down. So you want to make sure you're actually painting around this to allow room for the trees and everything else that's going to overlap this building we're putting in there. So just being that little bit more conscious. And I've actually created an outline that's available over on Patreon, so if you're wanting to access that, make sure you check that out. It's my smallest tier. It's only £3 a month, which means you can access this at a really reasonable cost, get it printed and paint straight onto it or trace it yourself. And then once you've painted as much as you can on this building without everything overlapping, I then jumped back to the first building and filled in then last couple of gaps with the greys and the brown. And whilst you're doing this, it's allowing drying time for the right hand side, so it is very strategic the way we are painting this particular piece. And then once you're happy with all of the detail we can add at this stage, I moved on to the final building in the middle, adding that lighter grey on the left hand side of the roof and the darker grey on the right hand side. that consistency is definitely there in terms of the shadow for all three of these buildings. And you can also jump back to the right and add a little bit more detail, then bars across the window the same way that I did for the left hand building, and mapping in a few more clean cut lines. There are a couple of small things that you can do now that we're waiting for this area to dry. So I added in that wheel on the left hand side using the light grey and blending a little bit of the dark brown to create the natural shadows that occur through this. After this, I created a lemon yellow and an earth green, and before going in with both of these colours, I mapped in some branches using that dark brown we've used for the buildings. I then used my flat brush, going in with the yellow first as it's the lightest out of the two colours, scraping off all of the excess paint so you only have a little bit on the brush, and then you can dot this on either scrap paper or an empty section of your paint palette head on to create a really bristle effect with the brush. I then went onto the page and dotted this head on again to create really small fine dots that are going to replicate the trees and create that texture that we're wanting for this particular section. And once you've got this technique mastered, it's super easy to do. As long as you have very minimal paint on the brush and dot this head on before going onto the paper, you really can't go wrong with it. And once I went in with the yellow, I went in with the green straight after in the exact same way, so these naturally mix together and it's not all one solid colour either. While all of this is drying, I then went in with the wet in wet method to create the sky. To do this, I added a layer of water down and distributed this out evenly, going around the mountain that we haven't painted in yet, and then went in with a really nice sky blue using horizontal strokes to make sure it's spread completely evenly, aside from the areas where the clouds are going to go later on. I then went in with another layer of colour for the trees, same again with the yellow and then the green, but this time I actually went in with a little bit of that really dark brown using the exact same technique as before. So I added a small amount to the brush, scraped off the excess, made sure I dotted it on my palette, and then went in and added this into the really nice shadowed areas of the trees. As we come further down, we actually go into a lot more brown, so I went in with my size 2 brush just to map this in quickly, and because it's so dark you don't have to go in with that bristle effect. It wasn't needed, and this is just the faster way to fill that space in correctly. Of course you can go in with the bristle effect if you're enjoying this method, but this just saves a lot of time and you don't have to then overdo it with this technique either. Moving on to the mountain now, I created a really nice pale blue, also blue and grey mixed together, and this is going to create a more muted blue, which is what you typically expect for a mountain as it's essentially rocks that we are painting. So going in with just that baby blue, it's going to look a bit unnatural, and this grey blue is just going to tone it down to the shade that we want it. Then went in with this muted blue to get the basic lines in, and I followed the reference photo and the outline that I'd also created for the general direction. But if you're unsure, lines on mountains typically move up towards that peak and centre point, and this makes it really easy to follow. You can't go wrong with this as it does move all towards that general direction. It'd look a bit strange if it didn't, so just follow moving these lines up towards the top centre point if you are unsure. And I moved the lines going from the bottom to the top just so they have more of that natural flow, and I think as it comes out the darker section going up to where that snowy area is, it looks a little bit more natural because as you're gliding the paintbrush and then pulling it off the page, you get more of a gentle edge. And then once I was happy with all of this dark grey, I went in with the baby blue and continued with the lines, and I mainly used this blue towards the bottom as that is how it looks in the reference photo. It's a lot darker, it's got a lot more colour going on down there, so getting all of that in, again working from the bottom up towards the top with the lines, and that consistency is going to really help create this mountain and create that rock-like texture that we're after. So now it's all just a case of filling in the gaps. For example, I went in with the dark brown going around that wheel so that you can see all of the lighter sections, and it actually makes the wheel stand out more. So subtle little things like that, taking away that white space, and it's just going to tie the whole piece together. Around the trees, I went in with some more green and yellow. Same thing with the dotted technique, as you don't want to take away all of the hard work that we've done to create that texture, but just going into the areas where I know that the space needs filling because it's white or there's a big section missing, can add more shadow if needed, little things like that that we can do to help tie everything together. Also going into the mountain, adding more grey, defining the lines a little bit more. Because we've had a little bit of drying time, you can darken any lines up without it bleeding into anything else, which is really nice. So being able to add that detail now to that, a little bit more shadow towards the right hand side maybe as well, to keep up with the consistency of the lighter section of the whole painting being the left hand side, as the light is definitely coming from that side of the piece. Even with the clouds as well, adding a couple of little grey dots with the light grey, just so they've got a little bit more texture and don't look as flat, contrasting with the blue sky. I also added more blue to actually deepen the sky, as I think it was a little bit too light in comparison to the clouds and then the mountain. So because we've darkened that mountain up now, we can see that the sky needs darkening to fit with that, and it is better to work this way as you're going from light to dark as opposed to the other way around, as that's just a lot harder and actually in most cases impossible to do. So going from that light to dark, you know that you're safe with adding these colours and you aren't going in too harsh to begin with. And then of course to finish, I went in with some water around all of the edges of the paper and dotted in all of the colours that we'd used today. I think this creates a really unique, special feel to the piece, and it brings your eye to the centre of the painting and really helps create that focal point, in my opinion. I think it's a really good way to tie everything together. And that's how I created this super easy Japanese inspired watercolour piece. If you've enjoyed today's video, head over to my Patreon. You can find the link down below in the description, where you'll find the real-time tutorial, which was 2 hours long, and I go completely in depth on how to create this piece. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye guys!